They broke ground without permission, raised 120 homes on land they didn't own and never saw the trap buried beneath their concrete foundations until it was far too late. Let me tell you a story they never wanted you to hear a story of. Arrogance, power, and the quiet man they thought was just a farmer. A man they underestimated. A man who watched as an entire homeowners association, armed with lawyers, zoning boards, and construction contracts, trespassed into his domain. But what they didn't know was that the land they stole had been baited, paperwork they never reviewed, laws they never imagined could be turned against them, and a legal trap so elegant, so devastating, that once sprung, there was no way out. They moved like a machine, cold, efficient, heartless. They saw land as plots, people as numbers, and laws as tools for control. They didn't bother to ask permission. They didn't notice the fine print buried in the county archives. They didn't realize that beneath every shovel of dirt they turned, they were stepping into a snare designed by a man who had been planning this for decades. The man, his name doesn't matter. What matters is what he knew. He knew the law better than any developer. He understood eminent domain, land grant loopholes, water rights, and old frontier deeds that still held legal weight. And when they poured foundations on his acreage, they activated every clause, every silent trigger, every trap hidden in 1,000 pages of legal armor. The homes were built, the keys were handed out, families moved in, but one morning without warning the letters arrived. One on every doorstep, cold, formal, legally bulletproof. The land you're standing on, it said, doesn't belong to you. It never did. You are trespassing, and the real owner is coming to collect. This wasn't revenge. This was chess played on a legal battlefield. And now, 120 families, one corrupt HOA, and an army of panicked lawyers were scrambling to understand how they'd lost everything. To one quiet man who never raised his voice but wrote the rules they ignored. Are you ready to know how he did it? They say the best traps don't look like traps at all, and this one, it looked like a forgotten pasture, overgrown grass, rusted fencing, a small barn leaning under the weight of time. No one in their right mind would think that patch of land, nestled between expanding suburban sprawl and empty woods, held the power to bankrupt an entire HOA. But that's the mistake the developers made. They saw what was on the surface, not what lay beneath it. The man they called him Harold wasn't flashy. He didn't dress sharp. He didn't drive anything newer than a '98 pickup. And that's exactly what made him invisible. You see, Harold grew up on that land. It was passed down through blood back to when his great-grandfather carved the deed with a handshake and a witness under the old oak tree. That deed, it still existed, filed under a different classification. A forgotten type of land ownership that hadn't been reviewed since before the county had digitized their records. Harold knew all of it. He studied it like scripture. He didn't just own the surface rights. He owned mineral rights, water access, air easements. And, thanks to an obscure legal doctrine, any structure built on that land without his written consent was legally forfeit to him or, subject to immediate removal. The HOA, blinded by ambition, had rushed the project. They ignored the strange notations in the title insurance, ignored the warnings in the footnotes of the plat maps. When one junior surveyor raised concerns about conflicting boundaries, he was fired within the week. They wanted homes, fast, cheap, and they thought Harold would either sell out or roll over. He did neither. Instead, Harold waited. He watched. He let them stack their arrogance like bricks in a wall. Every home built without his consent made his case stronger. Every concrete slab they poured was a nail in their own coffin. And when the 120th home stood completed, when the HOA president gave a speech about taking control of the future, Harold smiled. Then he opened the vault inside. Notarized letters, survey maps, chain of title documents stretching back 130 years. Legal notices prepared years in advance, filed, timed, ready, the moment they finished their empire. They realized they built it on Sandan. Harold held the tide. Want to see how he flipped the entire board with one letter? The letter wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't even threatening. It was precise, delivered by certified mail to each homeowner, the HOA board, the development company, and the county clerk's office, all on the same morning 8:02 a.m. Sharp, the header read. Notice of unlawful occupancy and termination of temporary forbearance agreement. A phrase so surgically legal, no one quite understood what it meant until their phones started lighting up. The phones didn't stop ringing. Homeowners were panicking. Realtors went silent. The HOA president, who had once bragged about neutralizing community disruptions, suddenly found herself staring at pages of land law that might as well have been ancient Greek, because buried in the letter tucked between legal clauses and citations was the real detonator. No structure, improvement, utility, or inhabitation on parcel 117A through 117X shall remain, operate, or exist on said land beyond the grace period of 14 calendar days from receipt of this notice. Under the provisions granted by Easement Reversion Act 1947 and Quiet Title Law 1911, subsection 4C, translation, every single home was illegally built, every structure was subject to removal. Every resident had 14 days to leave or face legal action. And here's the kicker, Harold had never signed a development agreement. The land had never legally transferred. All 120 homes, all utilities, every inch of the HOA's so-called planned community was squatting. And Harold had the receipts. The HOA scrambled to respond, but they were trapped. Their insurance didn't cover unauthorized development. Their title claims were void under gross procedural oversight and the builders. They had legally protected themselves by shifting liability to the HOA when they broke ground. It was beautiful, but Harold wasn't after chaos, he was after control. This was never about revenge, it was about power, about teaching them what it felt like to have decisions made above your head, rules handed down with no voice. He had lived under HOAs before. He'd watched as they fined veterans for flying flags, banned gardens, outlawed kids' bikes on sidewalks. And now they were feeling it powerless, boxed in, with nowhere to run. But Harold wasn't finished. There's a concept in land law few ever talk about: adverse possession. Most people misunderstand it. They think it means someone can steal land just by living on it. But the real weapon lies in its reverse. When someone builds on your land, under false belief or negligence, and you let them while documenting every step, you don't just hold ownership. You own everything they put there. Harold knew this. He'd been documenting the construction from the very first day. Time-stamped photos, drone footage, witness logs, certified letters he mailed to himself unopened and postmarked to prove he was aware that he objected but was choosing forbearance. That word forbearance was everything. It meant he allowed the encroachment temporarily, not through ignorance, but through strategic silence. And now, with the 14-day notice clock ticking, he unveiled the final clause in his legal trap. Constructive acquisition by estoppel sounds like a mouthful. But what it means is terrifying for the HOAC. Once the homeowners failed to vacate within the 14-day window, Harold filed a motion in county court not to evict them, but to legally claim ownership of the structures themselves. Not just the land, the homes, the wiring, the plumbing, the roads, the whole community. The HOA was paralyzed. If they fought him in court, they risked losing everything publicly. If they settled, they admitted fault. And remember, Harold had never agreed to sell. So in the eyes of the law, they had built his property with their money on his land. And now, by failing to remove it in time, they had abandoned their claims. It took just 3 court sessions. Harold emerged not just as landowner, but as the new legal owner of all 120 homes. Let that sink in. The HOA, with its fake authority, its bloated rules, its smug board meetings, now answered to the very man they tried to outmaneuver. A man who now held the keys not just to the land, but to the lives of every resident who once ignored him. He didn't yell, he didn't gloat. He just watched as the same people who'd tried to erase him now begged for lease agreements, rent terms, exceptions. But Harold had other plans. When justice comes slow, it sharpens. It doesn't strike, it carves. And Harold wasn't here for revenge. He was here to demonstrate the kind of justice no court could deny, no HOA could ignore, and no developer could ever undo. Once the court awarded him ownership of the homes, the headlines exploded. Local man seizes entire neighborhood. HOA defeated by one landowner. But behind the shock was something colder, calculated. Harold now owned the homes, and with ownership came choice. He could have sold them all, made millions overnight. But Harold wasn't after millions. He was after meaning. So what did he do? He held a meeting. Not a board meeting, not in some fancy clubhouse, but right there in the open field where the first concrete truck had ever trespassed. Folding chairs, no podium, just Harold, a clipboard, and 120 confused residents trying to figure out if they were about to be evicted or enslaved. And then he spoke. He told them the truth. Every detail, the ignored warnings, the erased boundaries, the HOA's decisions made behind closed doors, the rules enforced on paper no one read, the games played with people's lives like they were digits in a spreadsheet. Then he paused and made an offer. He would let them stay, no rent, no back pay, but only if they voted to dissolve the HOA completely, irrevocably. No more boards, no more fines, no more secret meetings, no more violations for lawn height, curtain color, or holiday decorations. The people would own their homes and trust under his charter, one that guaranteed freedom, privacy, and autonomy. He gave them 48 hours to decide. 1 vote per household, no lobbying, no coercion, just a choice. The HOA board was furious. They threatened lawsuits, tried to rally opposition, called the news, begged the county. But the residents, they were done. Sick of power plays, sick of fear, sick of being ruled by neighbors with clipboards. The vote came in, 117. 2-3, HOA-dead. Harold had done what few ever dreamed possible. He didn't just beat the system, he rewrote it. They didn't take it lying down, 3 board members clinging to the scraps of power refused to go quietly. They lawyered up, filed emergency injunctions, claimed Harold had coerced the community. One even went on a national talk show painting herself as a victim of land theft in modern America. The media latched on. Talking heads debated. Property law they didn't understand. Headlines twisted the story. They called Harold a land pirate, a legal manipulator. Some even compared him to a tyrant. But Harold didn't flinch, because while they were shouting into microphones, he was filing motions. Quiet ones, lethal ones. One by one, the lawsuits crumbled. You see, Harold's trap had been built on more than just paper. He'd anticipated everything: public outrage, media spin, legal pushback. He had time-stamped documentation of every moment, every ignored warning letter, every zoning violation, even footage of board members mocking residents in private emails, laughing at how the bumpkins didn't know. The rules, he leaked nothing. The court did it for him. The moment the lawsuits hit the docket, Harold's attorneys countered with discovery requests, forcing the HOA's internal documents into the public record. The same board that once fined a widow for wind chimes now had their dirty laundry read aloud in court. Unauthorized fee hikes, even backdoor kickbacks from the original developers. The real story came out, and the media flipped. Now Harold wasn't a tyrant. He was a whistleblower, a strategist, a quiet genius who turned the system's own rot against itself. The public cheered, experts applauded. Even some judges privately admitted they'd never seen someone use land law so precisely, but Harold didn't celebrate. He moved forward. He began transforming the neighborhood, not into some utopia, but into what it was always meant to be: free. The streets were renamed with the community's vote. The homes, once bound by rules, were finally personalized: flags, gardens, paint, art. People smiled. Kids played. The fear was gone, and those last 3 board members, they disappeared. Not by force, not by threat, by irrelevance. Because when a lie loses its power, it vanishes. But the story wasn't over yet. Beneath every great story, there's another one, a deeper layer, a buried root. And Harold, he always knew his land held more than soil. After the dust settled, after the court battles ended, and the last of the HOA power structure collapsed, Harold turned his attention to something most people never even noticed: a small fenced-off patch of his property. It wasn't near the homes. No one asked about it. Developers had flagged it early on as unsuitable for construction, citing unstable ground and possible historic artifacts. Harold had kept it untouched. Not because it was useless, but because it was sacred. You see, before the land was divided, before the zoning lines and concrete poured across it, that small hill had been part of something older. Much older. Native records ones Harold had studied in dusty libraries and reservation archives pointed to it as a burial mound, a sacred site. hidden for centuries beneath underbrush and ignorance. The developers never cared to check. The HOA never knew it existed, but Harold did, and now that he controlled everything, he opened the hill carefully, respectfully, with experts, archaeologists, tribal representatives. What they found beneath that hill shocked even the most seasoned historians. Stone tools, ceremonial carvings, bones laid in specific patterns, undisturbed for over 1,000 years. It wasn't just a burial. Seated was a village, a resting place for generations, and somehow, by fate or providence, Harold's legal trap had preserved it from destruction. Word spread fast. National Geographic, called the Smithsonian, reached out. Tribes from across the state offered support, blessing, partnership. But Harold wasn't interested in fame. He was interested in restoration. He took a portion of his settlement funds, the ones he could have used for luxury, for payoff, and built a heritage preserve, open to all, free to learn, and protected by the same legal walls that once shielded his trap. This wasn't just a win against an HOA. It was a resurrection of truth, of history, of something bigger than a man, bigger than a neighborhood. Harold had defended his land, yes, but he'd also saved a legacy. And in doing so, he'd exposed the hollowness of the system that tried to pave over everything: people, culture, story for profit. Most men, after a victory like Harold's, would disappear. They'd retreat to a quiet life, maybe buy a cabin, enjoy the peace they'd earned. But Harold didn't disappear. He expanded, because when you win a war this clean, this surgical, people start knocking on your door. Not the weak, not the desperate. The quiet ones, those who've been crushed by similar machines. Veterans fined into homelessness, elders stripped of their homes over missed lawn fees, families bankrupted by HOA legal traps. One by one, the stories came, and Harold listened. He did something unexpected. He formed an organization. Not flashy, no ads, no TV interviews, just a name whispered through forums, private groups, and legal blogs. The Sovereign Acre Initiative. A nonprofit built to teach others how to fight back, not with violence, not with noise, but with law. Real law, old law, forgotten law. His first move, he released everything. All the legal filings, the land trap strategy, the filings templates, the procedural instructions. He made it public, open source, and impossible to erase. Overnight, it went viral. County clerks saw an explosion of filings. People who had been silent for years suddenly had a blueprint, a legal weapon. The system panicked. Law firms scrambled. To shut it down, real estate lobbies tried to discredit it. HOA organizations launched smear campaigns, but none of it stuck. Because Harold didn't sell anything. He didn't profit. He just gave away the truth, and it was unstoppable. Communities began to rebel, not with protests, but with paperwork. Lawsuits flipped, HOAs dissolved. People reclaimed their land, not in rage, but in precision. Harold had sparked a movement, one that couldn't be televised or canceled. A movement buried deep in the soil of forgotten rights and ancient contracts. It wasn't just about property anymore, it was about sovereignty, the ability to live free of corporate fiefdoms disguised as neighborhoods. But Harold had one more card, because while everyone focused on the legal revolution, he'd been quietly buying up more land, not for development, not for resale, for something else entirely. It began quietly, as all real revolutions do, using funds from a silent network of donors, people who had benefited from his tactics. People who believed in the mission. Harold began acquiring properties across the country. Not high-profile estates, not glamorous retreats, but forgotten parcels. Abandoned farmland, condemned developments. Tax-forfeited land choked by weeds and silence. Each one chosen carefully, each one plotted with precision, each deed placed under a legal structure of absolute autonomous sovereign land trusts with airtight clauses that no HOA, no local council, no private interest could penetrate. These weren't just land purchases. They were fortresses, but not for battle, for rebirth. Harold called them the outposts, scattered across the map, but tied together by a single charter: freedom of life, thought, and ownership. No board meetings, no secret fines, no manufactured rules, just space. Clean, legal, space untouchable. People began arriving, in caravans. Former military, tradespeople, artists, Thinkers people, tired of playing by rules written by bureaucrats in air-conditioned echo chambers. People tired of begging for permission to breathe, and Harold welcomed them. Each outpost operated under a shared pact. You live free, but you contribute, not money value. You build, grow, teach, repair, protect. No bureaucracy, no political theater, just community by choice. Soon, solar grids rose, water systems tapped ancient wells, communications ran peer-to-peer, gardens flourished where strip malls had once been planned. Children ran through open fields where warning signs used to stand. It was a glimpse of a world that had been stolen, then reclaimed not through protest or violence, but by knowledge. A quiet, calculated undoing of everything they told us was permanent. And Harold. He remained in the background. No cult, no spotlight. Just a man at the edge of a fire. He started with pages, not torches. They called him paranoid, dangerous, radical. But none of that mattered, because for the first time in decades, people owned their lives again. And as the government began to take notice, as the corporate watchdogs circled like vultures, Harold made one final announcement. If you try to take it again, you better read the fine print. The final trap wasn't land, it wasn't lawsuits, it was time. While the world watched Harold as the man who outmaneuvered HOAs, reclaimed sacred land, and built free communities across the country, no one noticed the last document. The one he filed in silence, the one that ensured everything he built could never be taken, copied, or corrupted. It was called the Perpetuity Covenant, a legal mechanism so rare, so ancient, it predates the IRS. It states that land, once entered into the covenant, cannot be sold, transferred, or seized, not by the government, not by corporations, not even by the heirs of Harold himself. It becomes locked in legal stasis alive, self-sustaining, self-governing. Harold handed control of the outposts to no man, no group, but to a trust bound by immutable law, with rotating caretakers, anonymous, elected only by merit, not popularity. No one owns the outposts now. No one can. They exist beyond the reach of greed, and if anyone tries to force them open, they'll trigger the final clause. Because hidden inside the trust documents are provision straps Harold set for the future. If any government, corporation, or hostile force tries to take the land by eminent domain, exploit a loophole, or inject modern policy, the properties instantly revert to their original, ancient deeds. That means sacred land returns to tribal ownership. That means homes revert to individual title, fragmenting the entire development. That means power real power slips like sand through their hands. It's perfect, silent, binding, unstoppable. And Harold, he's gone now, disappeared. Some say he moved to the first outpost. Some say he walks the old trails by the burial hill. Some say he never existed. But the system remembers him, because the moment they try to build another HOA, another suburban trap, another neighborhood of quiet tyranny, his name comes up in courtrooms, like a ghost in the machine. Harold didn't fight the system. He rewrote it. And if you're listening to this, wondering what's possible, maybe you're not just here for a story. Maybe you're here to wake up, because this world, it doesn't belong to the loudest voice in the room. It belongs to the one who read everything and waited. If you want more stories that expose the hidden power plays shaping our lives, subscribe now. This is Every Story, where the truth isn't told, it's revealed. One story at a time.